The Night Watch. The cemetery stretched like a sleeping beast beneath the pale wash of the moon. Acres of marble and granite glimmered faintly. Rows of headstones lined up like teeth in a silent jaw. The wrought iron gate, black with age and twisted in places, loomed behind Daniel Carter as he closed it for the night. His first week as a night shift security guard had been uneventful so far. Long hours of silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the wind sighing through the crypts. The paycheck wasn't bad, and the hours suited him. But Boone Hollow Cemetery wasn't like other places. Locals had warned him at the diner when he'd mentioned the job. Old-timers leaned over their coffee cups, whispering like children sharing ghost stories. Strange place, that cemetery. Grounds ain't ever quiet after dark. You'll see things, hear things. Best keep your head down, boy. Daniel had brushed it off at the time, chalking it up to small-town superstition. But the longer he patrolled the grounds, the more he felt it. An unease, subtle at first, like invisible eyes following him through the rows of graves. That night, as his flashlight beam skimmed across the markers, he paused. One grave stood out. The soil was loose, darker than the rest, as though freshly turned. The mound rose slightly above the others, the dirt damp and heavy. Daniel crouched, running his fingers across the soil. He frowned. He had walked past the same row the night before, and it hadn't looked like this then. Strange, he muttered. He checked his clipboard. The name etched into the headstone was Eleanor Price, 1897 to 1936. The stone was weathered, the inscription half-faded, but the date was clear, nearly a century dead. Yet the grave looked recent. Daniel straightened, uneasy. He swept his flashlight over the rest of the row. All the other graves bore the settled, compacted soil of decades. Only Eleanor Price's plot looked disturbed. He finished his round, but the image stuck with him. By the time his shift ended at dawn, he couldn't shake the thought. Someone had been digging. The next night, he checked the grave again. His heart gave a slow, heavy thud when he saw it. The soil was flat now, perfectly leveled, as though it hadn't been touched at all. But Daniel knew what he'd seen. The third night, he made sure to pass Eleanor Price's grave first thing. Again, the soil was freshly turned, loose and uneven, as though a shovel had been at work. By the time he circled back hours later, it was pristine, smoothed over, undisturbed. He wasn't imagining it. Something or someone was digging up that grave every night, only for it to be filled again before dawn. On the fourth night, Daniel tried to catch the culprit. He parked himself on a bench near the Price plot, thermos of coffee in hand, flashlight resting across his knee. Midnight came and went. The fog rolled in low and heavy, curling around the headstones like ghostly fingers. Crickets fell silent. He dozed once or twice, jerking awake at the sound of branches shifting in the breeze. Then, just past 2 o'clock, a sound cut through the stillness. Scrape, thump, scrape. Daniel stiffened. His eyes darted to Eleanor Price's grave. In the pale moonlight, the soil was moving. It shifted in small, rhythmic jerks, dirt tumbling down the mound, as though something beneath was clawing its way up. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His flashlight trembled in his grip. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs were rooted, frozen between fight and flight. Then a new sound joined the first. The steady crunch of boots on gravel. Daniel's head snapped toward the path, and his light caught the shape of a man, tall, hunched slightly, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He wore the caretaker's uniform, dark and stained, and in his hands he carried a shovel slick with damp soil. The old caretaker. Daniel had seen him around during shift changes but never spoken to him. The man kept himself silent, always watchful. Now he moved to the Price grave with slow, deliberate steps, as though this was routine. The scraping from beneath the soil grew frantic. The ground seemed to heave, like something was trying to push through. The caretaker set his shovel aside, knelt, and pressed both hands flat against the dirt. His lips moved, murmuring words Daniel couldn't hear. His voice carried low and steady, like a prayer or an incantation. The soil stilled. The heaving stopped. Daniel blinked, his breath ragged in the cold night. The caretaker stood, lifted his shovel, and began filling in the loose patches of soil with precise, practiced motions. His movements were calm, methodical, as though he had done this countless times before. Daniel couldn't move. He sat frozen on the bench, staring as the caretaker worked. When the last of the soil was tamped down smooth, the old man finally lifted his head. His eyes met Daniel's across the foggy cemetery. For the first time, the caretaker spoke. "You didn't see anything. The grave that breathes." Daniel couldn't sleep the morning after. Even when he shut the blinds tight in his little apartment, the sunlight pressing against the curtains felt cold, wrong. He lay awake replaying the scene in his mind. The soil shifting as if something inside were clawing upward, the caretaker whispering words that stilled it, the flat, unnerving stare across the fog. "You didn't see anything." The words had weight, not just as a warning, but as a command. They echoed in his head until noon, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. By the time his next shift began, Daniel's nerves were strung taut. He told himself he should ignore it, keep his head down, just do the job. But every step deeper into Boone Hollow Cemetery pulled him toward Eleanor Price's grave, as if a string ran from his chest to that patch of earth. When his flashlight swept over the stone, he felt his stomach drop. The soil was loose again, fresh, breathing. He crouched low, holding his light close. This time he listened. At first there was only the rustle of leaves and the chirp of insects. But beneath that, faint, muffled wrong, came a sound. H-H-H-H-H, H-H-H-H-H, slow, rasping, like lungs straining under the weight of earth. Daniel staggered back, nearly tripping over a nearby headstone. His light wavered across the graves as his pulse thundered in his ears. Someone was alive down there, or something. He tried to keep his distance for the next hour, walking his route in long, looping circuits that always led him back toward the Price plot. Each time, the dirt looked different, sagging in places, then shifting upward in little jerks, as though something beneath was pushing, testing. He couldn't deny it anymore. The grave wasn't just disturbed. It was alive. At 1:30, he saw the caretaker again. The old man emerged from the fog as if the cemetery itself had birthed him. Shovel over his shoulder, lantern light pooling around his boots. Daniel ducked behind a mausoleum, heart hammering, peering through a gap in the stone. The caretaker moved straight to Eleanor Price's grave, knelt, and whispered. His words carried faintly this time, a rhythmic cadence that made Daniel's skin prickle. It wasn't English. It was older, rougher, the syllables grinding like stones in a riverbed. As he spoke, the soil went still. The strained breathing cut off. Silence spread through the cemetery like frost. The caretaker sighed heavily, as though carrying the weight of years. He began tamping the earth again, shovel slicing the silence with steady thunk, thunk, thunk. Daniel pressed back against the mausoleum wall, trying to still his own breath. He should confront the man, demand answers, call the sheriff. Anything. But his instincts screamed no. Not yet. Watch first. Understand what he was dealing with. The caretaker finished his work, smoothed the dirt, and stood still for a long moment. Then, without turning his head, he spoke into the night. "You can keep spying, boy, but you won't like what you find." Daniel's blood went cold. For the rest of his shift, Daniel avoided the caretaker, circling the grounds in wider loops, pretending to check fences and gates. But no matter where he walked, he felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back. By dawn, exhaustion had sunk into his bones. Yet, when he left the cemetery, he didn't go home to sleep. He drove instead to the county library, a squat brick building that smelled of dust and mildew. He found the oldest records he could, yellowed ledgers bound in cracked leather. His fingers traced names and dates, flipping through decades of burials. When he reached 1936, his eyes froze. Eleanor Price, died age 39. Cause of death, unnatural. Details restricted. Restricted. He dug deeper, searching local newspaper archives. He found only fragments, whispers of a scandal, a woman accused of unnatural acts, a mob gathered outside her home. Then nothing. Records ended abruptly. No obituary, no photographs, no mention of family. It was as if Eleanor Price had been deliberately erased from history. Daniel sat back in the stiff wooden chair, skin crawling. The caretaker wasn't just tending the grounds. He was guarding something, something connected to Eleanor's grave. The next night, Daniel returned armed with determination. He skipped his patrol and planted himself by the mausoleum, watching Eleanor's grave. The air was thick with fog, heavy as breath against the skin. At 2:14 exactly, the soil stirred. First a tremor, then a heave, dirt crumbling from the mound as though a fist had struck it from below. A voice followed, not the caretaker's. Deeper, muffled by earth. "Let me out." The words were broken, strangled, but clear enough to freeze Daniel's blood. He stumbled back, knocking his flashlight against a stone, the beam jerking wildly across the cemetery. The soil writhed, claw marks etching themselves upward in the loose dirt. Then, as if summoned, the caretaker appeared. His lantern cut through the fog, casting his face in grim shadows. He looked older than Daniel remembered, his skin stretched thin, eyes burning with weary fire. "You shouldn't be here," the caretaker rasped. His voice was not angry but tired, worn thin by years of carrying a secret no man should bear. Daniel swallowed hard, throat dry. "What's in there?" The caretaker's gaze didn't waver. He raised his shovel, planted it in the dirt beside Eleanor's grave, and leaned on it like a staff. "Not what?" he said softly. "Who?" The soil shifted again, a groan rising from beneath. Daniel's skin crawled with terror. The caretaker whispered the strange words again, low and rhythmic. The ground settled. The voice fell silent. He looked up at Daniel, eyes cold and certain. "You keep asking questions. Boy, you'll end up in the ground right beside her." The forbidden dig. Daniel didn't want to come back. Every fiber of his body screamed to quit the job, pack up, and leave Boone Hollow far behind. Yet something deeper, stubborn, and insistent dragged him back to the iron gates night after night. Curiosity, guilt, a sense that whatever secret the caretaker was hiding, it wasn't just dangerous for him. It was dangerous for everyone. By the fifth night, Daniel had a plan. He parked his truck outside the cemetery and cut through the woods, moving quiet as the owls. The ground was damp with fallen leaves, their wet crackle masked by the wind. When he reached the far side of the Price grave, he crouched low behind a cluster of angel statues half crumbling with moss. From there, he had a perfect view. The caretaker came as always, lantern swaying, shovel glinting. Daniel checked his watch. 2:14 a.m., the exact same time. The soil at Eleanor Price's grave stirred. A faint groan seeped from beneath the earth. The caretaker set his lantern down and began to dig. This time, Daniel didn't look away. Shovel after shovel of dirt came up, tossed aside with practiced rhythm. The caretaker's arms moved with the ease of someone who had done this countless times. Soon, the hole widened into a gaping wound in the earth. Daniel expected a coffin. He expected wood or rotted fabric, or bones. But when the lantern light spilled into grave, his breath caught in his chest. It wasn't a coffin at all. Something bound in heavy chains lay curled in the earth, wrapped tight in lengths of iron black with rust. The chains weren't looped casually but woven, threaded around limbs and torso, locking whatever was into a ball of restraint. Metal clasp bit deep into the figure's joints. It moved. A hand, pale skeletal, too long, twitched against its restraints. Dirt shifted around it. A faint moan seeped up through the night, thin and ragged, like wind through a broken pipe. Daniel clamped a hand over his mouth, heart slamming against his ribs. The caretaker leaned down, lantern light painting harsh shadows across his gaunt face. He didn't flinch at the sight. Instead, he began whispering the same guttural words Daniel had heard before, his voice steady, ritualistic. The chained figure writhed weakly, but the whisper seemed to sap its strength. "Stay down," the caretaker muttered between chants. "Stay quiet. You will not rise tonight." Daniel felt his insides turn cold. This wasn't just a grave. It was a prison. The caretaker worked quickly, tossing dirt back into the hole, burying the chained figure once more. His shovel bit into the earth with angry precision. Within minutes, the mound looked as though it had never been touched. When he finished, the caretaker wiped his brow with the back of his hand. His lantern light flickered, catching his eye. He wasn't alone. Daniel shrank back behind the angel statues, heart hammering. The caretaker's gaze lingered on the shadows, eyes narrowed. For a terrible moment, Daniel thought he'd been caught. Then the old man sighed. "Still here are you, boy?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the graveyard with unnatural clarity. Daniel froze. The caretaker raised his lantern, light sweeping across the stones. "I told you not to meddle. Curiosity will drag you under, same as the rest." His tone wasn't angry but weary, like a teacher scolding a child who couldn't help but touch the fire. Daniel forced himself to stand. His knees wobbled, but he stepped from the shadows. "What is it?" His voice cracked. He swallowed and tried again. "What's buried there?" The caretaker studied him for a long moment. His face was hollow, lined deep with years of sleepless nights. "Her name," he said finally, "was Eleanor Price. But what she became has no name a man should speak." Daniel's mouth was dry. Why chain her? Why dig her up every night? The old man's gaze was hard as iron. "Because the earth won't keep her. Every night she claws her way back, and every night I put her down again. If I leave her, even one night, she'll walk." A chill ran the length of Daniel's spine. "Walk where?" The caretaker's lantern flame wavered. His eyes sank into shadow, into the world, into you, into anyone she can take. The ground shivered beneath them, subtle but real. A muffled thump sounded beneath the soil, like a heartbeat too large for the earth to contain. Daniel stumbled back. "That's not possible." The caretaker's voice hardened. "You think graves are just holes in the dirt? Some things don't stay buried. Some things won't die at all." Another thump. The soil bulged just slightly, as if testing the strength of its prison. The caretaker slammed his shovel into the mound, pressing down with all his weight. "Back!" he roared into the dirt. "Back where you belong." The ground stilled. Silence swallowed the cemetery. Daniel stared, his entire body trembling. His instincts screamed at him to run, to never return. But something darker bloomed in his chest, a gnawing obsession. He had seen the impossible, and now he needed the truth. The caretaker looked at him, eyes like flint. "This is the last time I warn you. Leave it alone. Go back to your rounds. Forget you ever saw Eleanor Price." But Daniel couldn't. He knew he wouldn't. As the caretaker lifted his lantern and walked back into the fog, Daniel's gaze lingered on the grave. The soil wasn't still anymore. It was pulsing, slow, steady, like breath. The keeper of the secret. The grave would not let him rest. By day, Daniel tried to convince himself it wasn't real, that exhaustion and shadows had tricked him. But at night, when the fog crawled in and the moon rode high, his mind returned to Eleanor Price's grave, to the chains, to the thing writhing beneath the earth. The caretaker's warning rattled in his skull. Leave it alone. Forget you ever saw Eleanor Price. But Daniel couldn't forget. Curiosity had burrowed into him deeper than fear ever could. On the seventh night, he made his choice. Instead of circling the grounds, Daniel marched straight to the Price plot with his own flashlight and a borrowed spade. The soil glistened under moonlight, fresh and damp as though daring him to touch it. His hands shook, but he drove the spade into the earth. The first scoop of dirt felt like a crime. The second felt like betrayal. By the third, the ground seemed to quiver, a faint tremor running up the handle into his arms. Still he dug. Minutes bled into an hour. The hole deepened, his breath came ragged, and his back screamed with strain. Then the spade struck something hard with a clang. Daniel dropped to his knees, brushing the dirt away with his hands. His fingers scraped metal, rusted iron, biting cold. Chains. They coiled around a pale shape half exposed in the lantern glow. The same twisted form he'd glimpsed before, limbs wrapped tight, head bowed under the weight of restraint. And then it moved. The figure's head tilted up slowly, soil cascading from its face. Two eyes snapped open. They weren't human eyes. They glowed faintly milky and gray, pupils dilated until they filled the sockets. The sight of them froze Daniel's blood. He scrambled backward, but the thing in the grave followed with its voice. Soft, female, almost tender. "Help me?" The words weren't muffled by soil this time. They slid into his ears as though whispered from inches away. Daniel clutched the spade, knuckles white. His mind screamed to run, but his body swayed toward the grave, compelled by that voice. "Please," the thing breathed. "I've been buried so long. Chained, suffering. Let me out." The chains rattled, straining against the figure's limbs. Daniel could see the flesh beneath. Not rotten, not skeletal, but pale and stretched, too smooth, like skin pulled over something that wasn't meant to wear it. "Free me," it begged again, "and I'll be yours. I'll never leave you." A sudden voice cut the air like a blade. "Step away." Daniel spun. The caretaker stood at the edge of the lantern light, shovel raised like a weapon. His face was carved in fury and fear. "You fool!" The old man spat, storming forward. "Do you know what you've done?" Daniel staggered back, spade trembling in his grip. "She's alive. She's suffering. You can't just—" "She's not alive," the caretaker bellowed. His eyes blazed in the lantern light. "That thing died almost a century ago. What you see now is hunger wearing her face." The ground trembled. The chained figure writhed, chains creaking, earth spilling into the hole. Its voice rose, sweet and venomous. "Liar! He keeps me in the dark. He fears me. You're stronger than him. Help me, Daniel. Help me and I'll make you whole." Daniel's heart pounded. The caretaker raised his shovel, pointing it like a spear. "She's in your head. Boy, that voice ain't hers. It's a parasite, a sickness that clings. Once you loose those chains, it'll spread, through you, through this town, to everyone." The thing shrieked, the sound splitting the night, raw and animal. The earth heaved, dirt spraying as if the grave itself was rejecting its prisoner. Chains snapped. One, then another. The figure rose higher, pale limbs writhing free of the soil. Its head lolled back, mouth stretching too wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth where none should be. Daniel dropped his spade, stumbling away in horror. The caretaker roared, swinging his shovel down into the grave. Metal clashed with bone, sparks of rust scattering. The thing shrieked, thrashing, grabbing the old man's arm, a clawed hand. Flesh tore, blood darkened the soil. "Run!" the caretaker gasped, forcing the shovel deeper into the creature's chest. "If you value your soul, run." But Daniel didn't run. He grabbed his dropped spade, hand shaking, and swung it down with all his strength. The blade struck the creature's head. A sickening crack echoed. The figure shrieked once more, a sound that split the night sky. Then its body convulsed, folding it on itself, collapsing into a heap of chains and rotted cloth. The soil seemed to sigh, pulling it down, swallowing a whole. In seconds, the grave was flat again, silent. Daniel collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. The caretaker sagged beside him, clutching his torn arm, lantern flickering in his other hand. His face was pale, sweat beading his brow. "You shouldn't have dug," the old man whispered. His voice was weak, trembling. "But you didn't let her out. That counts for something." Daniel stared at the grave, numb. What was she? The caretaker's gaze drifted to the headstone. A woman once, but she made a pact with something she shouldn't have. The town tried to bury her sins. Didn't work. So I kept watch. My father before me, his father before him. He looked at Daniel then, eyes hollow with years of burden. Someone always has to keep her down. The lantern flame sputtered. The old man's voice grew thin. "I'm too old now. Can't do this much longer. Looks like it's your turn." Daniel's mouth went dry. "No, I can't." "You already saw," the caretaker rasped. His bloodied hand gripped Daniel's wrist with surprising strength. "You already dug. The grave knows you now. She knows you. There's no leaving it." The caretaker's grip slackened. His body slumped forward, lantern falling into the dirt. The light died. Daniel sat frozen, the fog closing around him. The grave silent at his feet. But in the stillness beneath the earth, he thought he heard it again. Breathing, waiting.